Okay, hello everyone. This is Gemara review video number 2. Super exciting. We are now going to go back and begin our Masachet Berakhot on Daf Bet Amud Aleph, page 2a. And this is our opening Mishnah. We're actually going to divide it up into 2 parts. So at first I'm going to translate and go over from Me'ematai until Amud HaShachar. And then we're going to do the last part as well. So let's begin. So our Mishnah is actually, as we said, right, Mishnah comes a little bit earlier than the Gemara, right, for those of us who are new to learning this. This is, again, kind of like what the rabbis trying to understand a lot of the laws that we have in Tanakh, that we have in the Torah, and then later on, 300 years later, is when the rabbis of the Gemara come to discuss and interpret the Mishnah. So right now, we're still up in the stage of the Mishnah. So we're going to start off right away with a question, with a ba'aya. So with that, we're going to start off highlighting in orange. Okay, big first word. Me'ematai korin et hashma ba'aravin. Here's our first question, our first ba'aya. Me'ematai means from when. So the Mishnah's first question is, from when can you start reading Shema ba'erev, at night? At what time, if I have to read Shema twice a day, during the morning and during a night, right? And here we're starting from talking about the night first. What is the earliest I can start saying Kriyat Shema? When is it considered night enough for me to start? So now we're going to have a number of different opinions, number of tshuvot to this question. And we're going to start off with the answer of Rabbi Eliezer. So here we go. Let's go back to, here we go. So our first answer, highlighting this in yellow as it's a tshuva, Misha she'kohanim nichnasin le'echol mitrumatam, ad sof ha'ashmura harishona divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Here's our first answer. Rabbi Eliezer says the following. Misha means from a time that the kohanim nichnasim le'echol trumatam, from a time that the kohanim can go in, here it means going into the Beit HaMikdash, to eat their truma. As we said in class, truma is basically what regular people, part of Am Yisrael, have to give the Kohanim from their crops. If they were farmers, the Kohanim work full-time in the Beit HaMikdash. They're kind of like the rabbis and the teachers. They don't work the land. So we basically pay their salary by this tax of truma, where you can give either, you get to choose 1/40th, 1/50th, or 1/60th of your harvest. And this is basically donated to the Kohanim to eat. The catch is that Kohanim can only eat it when they are tahor, when they are pure. So if they became impure, for example, they touched a bug, or they had to go to a funeral, or they had to do many different things that could render them impure, they had to go to the mikvah and wait until it was quote-unquote night. And once after they'd gone to the mikvah, it became night, only then they were able to eat that truma. So Rabbi Eliezer is saying that's going to be our starting point. That's really going to be how we define the starting point of when night happens. When the Kohanim are allowed to eat their truma, that is when you are allowed to start saying Kriyat Shema at night. Until when? And he actually gives us, wasn't asked by the Mishnah, but he gives us a deadline. Until the Ashmura Harishona, until the end of the first watch, which if you had a chance to look at Rashi says we basically divide the night into 3 parts, from nightfall until dawn, and this would be until the first third of the night. So again, that is kind of the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, from the time the Kohanim can eat truma until the end of the first watch, or the first third of the night. Okay, let's go to opinion number 2. And now we're going to see the opinion of the Chachamim, the general sages. The Chachamim omrim ad chatzot. And the Chachamim say, it's interesting, right? They don't kind of give us the first kind of time you could start. So it's interesting, different people debate whether this means that, everyone agrees that the time period you can start is when the Kohanim can eat truma, but there's really a machloket about what time you end. And the Chachamim say you can go until chatzot. You can say Kriyat Shema until midnight, but after midnight, it would be too late. Okay, and then we keep going. Now we're going to have a third opinion by Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel Omer, Ad Shi'aleh Amud HaShachar. He is the most generous, and Rabban Gamliel says, no, actually, you have the entire night. You have until Amud HaShachar, you have until dawn. that is your time frame for reading Kriyat Shema. Okay, cool. So we have these three opinions, right? Everyone kind of starting off and saying that we do it from the time the Kohanim can eat Truma, and then different opinions when this would end. Should it be just the first third of the night? Should it be midnight? Or should you have until dawn? Now we have a story that involves Rabban Gamliel. So for this, it's basically kind of a series of different ma'amars, different statements. So we're going to highlight these in pink and we'll break it up as we go along. Okay. Mazer ba'u banav mi beit ha-mishneh. So there was a ma'aseh, there was a time, an incident when his sons, Rabban Gamliel's sons, came from a party. And again, it's unclear, was it a wedding, were they just hanging out with their friends? But they came from a party. Amru lo, and they, gotta make sure we're in the highlighter here. Amru lo, they say to their father, lo karinu et hashma. And they say to their father, we have not yet read the Shema. What should we do? Is it too late? Can we still do it? They get back home late from this party. So his father answers them and actually says two things. Amar lahem, he says to them, we'll do a little colon again over here. Im lo ala amud hashachar chayavim aten likrot. If it's not yet dawn, you are obligated to still read. So you're not out yet, you can still read. And now he tells them something a little bit extra over here, and he says, Velo zo bilvad. Not only this, but velo zo bilvad amru. Ela kol ma she'amru chachamim al chatzot mitzvatan ad shi'aleh amud hashachar. So velozo bilvad means kind of like not only here. And when we see this kind of word in the Mishna or in the Gemara, it's when we are basically kind of learning from one case to a similar case. And what Rabban Gamliel is saying is it's not just in our case of Kriyat Shema, but really, kol ma she'amru chachamim al chatzot. Anything the sages said that your deadline is chatzot, surprise twist ending, mitzvatan ad shi'aleh amud hashachar. The rabbis really meant that deadline was dawn, was amud hashachar. And we're going to see some examples when we continue reading the Mishnah. So Rabban Gamliel kind of says two things. One is he states his opinion, which is that really you have until dawn to read Kriyat Shema at night. And then his second kind of statement here, which is a new thing we haven't heard, a chidush, is he actually tells his sons, guess what? The chachamim, even though they said midnight, they don't actually disagree with me. They actually really think that you have to read, that you have until dawn. And actually any time, in any halacha where the chachamim say you only have until midnight, that's just they gave you an earlier deadline, but in real life, you really could read it until dawn. And we'll talk about why in a couple of minutes. So we're going to pause here. And here I just kind of pasted for you a little bit of the translation, the title section of the Mishnah, and again, the translation that we just read and went over if you want to pause and look at it. And here is kind of every part that we went to all the way until Amud HaShachar. So again, feel free to pause if you want to check your work. Otherwise, we're going to continue now with the second part of the Mishnah. And actually, right before we kind of look at that second part of the Mishnah, just to go over that chart that was in our worksheets, right? So we saw the three opinions, Rabbi Eliezer, Chachamim, Rabban Gamliel. They all have different deadlines for Kriyat Shema at night, even though according to Rabban Gamliel, he's arguing that Chachamim really agree with him. And as we kind of said earlier when we discussed this a little bit in class, we talked a little bit about the pasuk, right? The pasuk for, if we're going to say v'shechcha u'bekumecha, when you lie down and when you get up, is talking about Kriyat Shema, that we actually have an obligation to read Shema before we go to sleep, right? Meaning at night, and when we get up, meaning in the morning. Our question was, well, what does v'shechcha mean, right? What does it mean when you lie down? Like everyone in our class, I'm sure, goes to sleep at different times. Are we talking about when most people go to sleep, when some people go to sleep? And the big question was, are we talking about the time when people go to sleep, and like that's when you have to say Shema? Or does B'Shechcha, when you lie down, just mean you have to say it when most people are sleeping? So if we think about the three opinions that we saw, Rabbi Eliezer, who says that you start saying it right, kind of everyone says, you start saying it at the beginning when the Kohanim can eat Truma, but he says you have to stop kind of like at the first third of the night, which is pretty early. It sounds like according to Rabbi Eliezer, he's saying when do you actually have to say Kriya Shema? What does B'Shechacha when you lay down mean? It's talking about when people go to sleep. Like you really have, your deadline of saying it is it has to be like an early part of the night. Chachamim are saying no, midnight. It really means when you are asleep. I know people in high school go to sleep long after midnight, but back, especially when there was no electricity and there was no Netflix and not much to do, most people were sound asleep at midnight. So midnight here, or chatzot, would mean when you are asleep. And Rabban Gamliel says you have until dawn, meaning you really have until the entire time period people are sleeping, right before they would get up. Okay, so let's keep going in our Mishnah. So now we're going to go from the second part, Hekter Chelavim, all the way until where it says Min Ha'avera, and we know that's when the Gemara is going to start, because we have Gimel Mem letting us know that the Gemara is now going to start discussing the Mishnah. Okay, so the Mishnah is going to continue with a couple of proofs for what Rabban Gamliel said. Rabban Gamliel said that the Chachamim, whenever they give you a deadline of midnight, it's really fake out, and the real deadline is dawn. So he's going to give a couple of proofs for this. So here we go. Hekter chalavim ve'evarim mitzvatan ad shialeh amud hashachar. He gives another example of halachot that have deadlines, and he says this has to do with the Kohanim bringing korbanot in the Beit HaMikdash, and he says when they had to burn all the fats and the limbs of the animals on the Mizbeach, on the altar. It's a little gross, but that's kind of what went on with korbanot. How long did the Kohanim have to do this? According to the Chachamim, they had until dawn, right? They had until dawn to kind of burn all this leftover parts of the animals from the korbanot, right? And he gives another example. So that's proof number one. Now we continue with proof number two. Make sure I'm highlighting the right thing over here. V'kol hanechalim leyom echad mitzvatan ad shialem amud hashachar. And his second example is, so the first one was there's certain parts of the animals that you have to burn by a certain point, and he says that this also, even if Chachamim had said you only have until midnight, you really have until amud hashachar, you really have until dawn. And his second example is sometimes for korbanot that would be brought, the Kohanim, or sometimes even people that were part of Bnei Yisrael, would be allowed to eat parts of the animal, but there was a deadline. We don't like too many leftovers for korbanot. So any korbanot that were nechalim, that were eaten leyom echad, you had 1 day to eat them, right? So the question is like, okay, if I can eat my leftovers for 1 day, when is that day over? You know, is that day over when like the stars come out and it's night, or is that day over like, you know, is it the day and the night? So here we're saying mitzvatan ad shialeh amud hashachar, you actually have the whole time until dawn to eat those korbanot. But now in those two cases, the Gemara asks a question because the Mishnah, Rabban Gamliel is saying here, really in these two cases you have until dawn. But now the Mishnah is going to ask a question, so we'll switch to orange for our ba'aya. Im ken, Aleph Chaf stands for im ken. If so, lama amru chachamim ar chatzot. If this is true in these first two cases, that you actually can burn the parts of the animals and eat the leftovers until dawn, why did Chacham say you only have until midnight? And here's the answer, not just for that, but even for Kriyat Shema. So we'll highlight this in yellow. This is our tshuva to finish off the Mishnah. Here we go. Kidei leharchik adam min ha'avira. Leharchik means to distance, and kidei means since, or the reason here really is, in order to distance someone from sinning. And we talked a little bit about this. What this means is, I'm sure we can all think of times when we had assignments or deadlines to do something and we left it until super last minute, and sometimes we were able to pull it off and sometimes we weren't. So here, whenever there is a hard deadline, especially with leftover korbanot, which is like serious stuff going on, you could get kares if you're eating it too late, or serious punishments. Chachamim didn't want you leaving it till the last minute. They want to distance you from this chance that you would sin. And same thing with Kriyat Shema. We don't want you falling asleep and waiting till like, oh, wake up at 5 a.m. and do it. It'll totally be fine. Then you end up sleeping through the night. Chachamim therefore gave you an earlier deadline in order to make sure that you would not make a mistake. And finally, I'm going to pause here, and you guys can pause the video if you want to check your worksheet. This is just the last sections of the Mishnah with our title, section, and translation.